B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, March 13th, 2019, an historic day in California as Governor Gavin Newsom issues an order declaring a moratorium on the death penalty for as long as he is governor. And as you may know, my secret studio is located less than a mile from San Quentin State Prison, the home of California's death chamber, which is being dismantled today. And yeah, I could pull out a drone and fly it right over to the prison. I'm sure they'd shoot it down pronto. But that's how close I am. And I'm waiting for a call from my friend on death row, James P. Anderson. I've talked about him a little bit in the past. How James and I grew up 2 miles apart in Cincinnati, Ohio. He's African American. He went to a public high school. My parents sent me to a Jesuit high school. He wound up spending now 40 years on death row in California for a double murder he says he didn't commit. And over the last 5 years, I've gotten to know James. I have read his trial transcript, and I know fundamentally that he did not get a fair trial. He was tried and convicted in Riverside County, a racist hotbed, in Southern California's Inland Empire, near the town of Coachella. People now know it as the site of an annual spring music festival, but it was just a bunch of orange groves back in the 1970s. And while I cannot find the evidence to prove that James Anderson is innocent, I believe his claims. And after 40 years on the row, I'm sure he is relieved that at least for the next 4 years and possibly 8, Governor Newsom will prevent the prospect of his execution. Now, my friend James Anderson is not typical of the people on death row. There are a lot of hardened criminals there. And California voters may feel they've been cheated because we've had initiatives twice in the last 5 years where voters have narrowly retained the death penalty as the law here in California. Now, so few people have been executed. $5 billion has been spent in the last 20 years. There hasn't been an execution since 2006 here. And so there are practical as well as philosophical issues. And I heard Governor Newsom make the announcement on radio this morning, and I could tell he was not reading from a script. I know Gavin a little bit. He used to live about a mile from where I live before he moved to Sacramento, to the capital, to take the position as governor. I've interviewed him many times, and we've had an opportunity to chat offline as well. He's a complicated guy, and I don't support every position that Gavin Newsom espouses. But he is a bold leader who changed the whole nation when he embraced same-sex marriage and defied Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, and Barney Frank when they said, "Gavin, don't do this, it's too soon." And he told the story about how his own father, who was a state judge here in California, took up the case of a man who had been railroaded into prison by the mob and sat on death row for years, and how that affected him. And he knows he's going to get a lot of blowback from the victims groups and the law enforcement organizations. But he's doing this very early in his first term, and I think that is politically wise. It remains to be seen if the state Supreme Court will honor the moratorium that Gavin Newsom has imposed. I don't think they can actually force him to follow through on executions. But as you may know, I slammed the California State Supreme Court back in December when we learned that commutations that had been issued by outgoing Governor Jerry Brown were being canceled by the Supreme Court, despite its articulation just months before of a pretty high standard of executive abuse that would be required for them to intervene and withdraw clemency issued by the governor. Because of the history, Jerry Brown, of course, had put 4 people on the state Supreme Court who were opposed to the death penalty, and they were all recalled. Rose Bird was the Supreme Court justice who lost her job as a result. And so Brown was aware of that and didn't really push too hard on death penalty issues during his second round as governor of California. But for me personally, this is a very important move. And to know that James Anderson is, at least for a predictable period of time, not subject to execution, it's very gratifying. Gavin, I'm grateful. Thank you for making another bold move. And while we're looking at crime and punishment, in Melbourne, Australia, the most senior Catholic to be convicted of child sex abuse, former Cardinal George Pell, received a 6-year sentence in prison in Australia for raping a 13-year-old choir boy, and this was an event that occurred in the 1990s, we are told. And this is justice, I suppose, of a sort, not the kind that I believe in, but a 70-year-old defrocked priest from New Jersey who had been accused by more than 20 victims of sexual abuse that occurred between 1980 and 1992. His name was John Caparelli, and he was living relatively incognito in Henderson, Nevada, which is a community south of Las Vegas. And he was found dead in his kitchen, shot through the neck. Now, it could be a random homicide. It could have been a victim who decided that he, probably a he in this case, had not gotten justice and may have taken the law into his own hands. Perhaps we'll find out. Across the nation, people are noting the second sentencing of Paul Manafort, who was for a time the chair of the Trump election campaign in 2016. And it's a little complicated because the cases did overlap, the one from Virginia and the one in federal district court in Washington, where he was sentenced by Judge Amy Berman Jackson today. And just to make it simple, she added to his sentence from the previous court, and he will serve a total of about 7.5 years in prison. Now, today's crimes were money laundering, obstruction of justice, failing to disclose lobbying work, and failing to register as a foreign agent. And Jackson was tough in her commentary to Paul Manafort, who said that he's already suffered enough. But she said that that is not the case, that he knew what he was doing. There's no question this defendant knew better, and he knew what he was doing. And the judge rejected the argument that the prosecution was somehow misguided or invalid. His lawyers left the courtroom and once again said, no collusion. They're obviously talking to Trump, and Jackson is aware of that too. She said the defense lawyers kept repeating it, not because they hoped to influence her thinking, but for some other audience. Yeah, the guy on executive time watching Fox and Friends all day long. So this is, a signal development. But we have to remember that Paul Manafort was not accused of conspiring with Russians to manipulate the outcome of the election. That was the original nature of the investigation. And our friends Ray McGovern, Bill Binney, and others who form the organization Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity published a new open letter today, this one aimed at the Attorney General, saying that if Mueller turns in his completed report, it should be graded incomplete. And they recap in detail what we have covered on this podcast since the whole Trump-Russia narrative surfaced, that the DNC more likely was subject to a leak, not a hack. And there is some evidence to support that. There is no evidence public to support the original contention. that it was an outsider hack and that Russians did it? And so I've linked to this. It's a little long, and I encourage you to read through it, because you will see that Bob Mueller has not finished his work, and that many people have not been contacted who have evidence, including Bill Binney, including Craig Murray, the British ambassador, who says he went to American University in Washington, D.C., and picked up a flash drive or a thumb drive that had the information that was later published by WikiLeaks. They also focus in on comments by the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, that the forensic evidence convinced him that this was the case. But the VIPS letter points out that the government has never publicly showed us any of the forensic evidence they claim to have examined. And that since Bill Binney and others know that the entire network is wired by the NSA, they know what is going from point A to point B at any given time, and they could prove it if they wanted to. Also today, we have seen the release by a Republican congressman named Collins, who serves on Douglas Collins of Georgia. He serves on the Judiciary Committee, and he's taken it upon himself to release a second transcript, this of an interview with Lisa Page. Now, she was the FBI lawyer who was involved in an extramarital affair with Peter Strzok, who was a top investigator, and their text messages went public and show that they were critical of Trump. And Page, on the defensive, says, "Many of us in law enforcement dislike the subject of our investigations. We are not keen on pedophiles and fraudsters and spies and human traffickers. That is fine. What would be impermissible is to take that harsh language and to act in some way that was illegal or against the rules, and we don't do it." Page also testified that her intentions with Strzok were not nefarious, but reflected that they didn't think Trump was likely to win. Now, some of this may be explaining away things that were darker at the time. It's hard for us to know. But one of the interesting things she talks about is her discomfort when Hillary Clinton was finally interviewed by FBI agents, and she was permitted to have her top aides, Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson, sit in on the interview. Page dryly noted it's not typically appropriate or operationally necessary to have fact witnesses attend an interview. And she pushed back against the suggestion that the FBI didn't really consider charging Clinton with negligence under the Espionage Act, saying they did consider it but decided the move would be too constitutionally vague. And then Comey, FBI director at the time, jumped ahead of Attorney General Loretta Lynch because he felt she was compromised because of her meeting on the tarmac in Phoenix with Bill Clinton. And it certainly was a mess. Now, I've also linked in the show file for today's podcast to an interesting piece that was published about a week ago at the website of the Federalist Society, not my favorite group. But I go where information and my curiosity lead me, and I want to recommend that you read this essay by Willis L. Krumholtz. He is a fellow at Defense Priorities, an organization that features Andrew Bacevich, a man I deeply respect. And this guy is a lawyer, he's got an MBA, he works in the financial services industry, and he's clearly an ally of Trump. And the article is headlined, 35 Key People Involved in the Russia Hoax Who Need to Be Investigated. Now, I'd like you to read through this if you're a skeptic like me, because he makes some good points. Now, I have requested an interview with Mr. Krumholtz, and so far he has not responded to my query. If I get to talk to him, there are a number of names I'd like to add to his list. And we'll get to my additions later. But he talks about Fusion GPS and its founder, Glenn Simpson, an FBI lawyer named Kevin Kleinsmith, who wrote anti-Trump texts with Strzok and Page, an FBI official, Joseph Pientka, the go-between for Fusion GPS and the FBI, linked to Bruce Orr, whose name has come up before. And here's some people we've never heard of. Tashina Gauhar, a Department of Justice attorney deeply involved in applications to the FISA court, one of the few people who ever saw the missing Clinton emails that were found on Anthony Weiner's computer. And there are many others. I'm not going to go through all 35 or 36 of these, but you'll recognize Victoria Nuland, a top State Department official who had a role in pushing fusion GPS theories in the State Department. She got an early copy of the Steele dossier. Then Jonathan Weiner at the Obama State Department. He received documents alleging Trump-Russia collusion from the notorious Clinton guy, Cody Shearer. And Cody Shearer wrote his own opposition research, and some people believe that's where the allegation of a P-tape or compromat originally came from, not from Steele himself. It was inserted by Cody Shearer. I can't prove that, but I have heard that argued, and credibly. Let's see, there are others here. Mark Elias, the lawyer who laundered the money so that the Clinton campaign wasn't seen directly paying Fusion GPS. Robbie Mook, the campaign official on the Clinton for President run, who was the first Hillary official to publicly say that Russia wanted to help Trump win and started that whole meme. Sidney Blumenthal, amen. I'd like to know what he had to do with this. And Dan Jones, who was the top staffer to Dianne Feinstein at the Intelligence Committee. He shepherded the torture report, and for that I respect him. But then he left and cashed in, set up the Penn Quarter Group, and we have never seen much information about how he raised money from a lot of wealthy leftist supporters to continue the investigation by continuing to pay Christopher Steele. So, those are the people who I've highlighted from the list put together by Krumholtz. But I would add, we need to hear from Stephen Halper, the American dirty trickster who goes back to Reagan, who is in Britain. He was tied to Steele and to Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6. I've mentioned Bill Binney. I've mentioned Craig Murray. There's a passing reference to Seth Rich in Krumholtz's piece, but I consider him to be a factor and something that needs further investigation. Imran Awan, who is Debbie Wasserman Schultz's IT guy. And if I get to talk to Krumholtz, we will air that out and share it with you on a podcast right here. My podcasts are made possible by listeners like you who support my work with your subscriptions. Great people like Jim Garrison, Carl Howard, Susan Gavet, and Cliff Johnson. They kick in between $5 and $20 a month. And if you're able to do that, I'd like you to. All you have to do is visit peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, then click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and boom, you can make a choice that's easy for you and your budget. $5, $10, $20 a month. And we've got a bonus book. It is Dr. Justin A. Frank's Trump on the Couch for new annual subscribers at the $50 level or more who give me a mailing address in the continental U.S. Yesterday, I argued about impeachment and said that Nancy Pelosi is wrong to keep it so-called off the table. And today in the New York Times, in an analytical piece, Peter Baker and Emily Cochran air this out a little bit. And it is fair to say that at this point there are not enough votes to convict and remove Trump from office. And many people fear that a half-assed attempt to impeach him, where he is indicted but not convicted, would actually make things worse. And I don't agree with that. I believe that even if you can't persuade 20 senators who are Republicans to honor the Constitution over their political loyalty, that needs to be shown to the American people. The idea that despite the obvious evidence of obstruction of justice and deep corruption, new stuff emerges almost every damn day, that we're going to leave this guy to fester and hope that voters will take him out in 2020 without impeaching him? Will the investigations be enough? I have deep concerns about that. And so I really believe that fundamentally, this is an obligation for the Democrats in the House. The crimes are apparent. The remedy in the Constitution is clear. And to make this an optional political decision, in my view, is flat out wrong. And get this, Juan Vargas is this Democrat representative from California, and last week he really angered me with his tweet against Ilhan Omar, where he called her anti-Semitic and then said, no one can question our relationship with Israel. Well, he was an idiot about that, but today he's brilliant. Quote, I disagree with her. The Constitution is clear. If there's an impeachable offense, we should impeach the president or impeach whoever. And that's what we should do. Follow the Constitution and not politics. And here is a quote from Brad Sherman, my old buddy. He's a congressman from Sherman Oaks in the San Fernando Valley, and he has already authored his own articles of impeachment. He said, we won't actually remove this president until Sean Hannity calls for us to remove him, or until Laura Ingraham, until we drive home our message, change public opinion, and develop more facts. That's what the process does. You don't avoid it because you can't see what is at the end of the tunnel. You enter the tunnel. Now here's a counter from Joshua Matz, who co-authored with Lawrence Tribe To End a Presidency. Impeaching him under circumstances where the proceeding is all but doomed to failure could create a far more disastrous precedent than not impeaching him in the first place. An acquittal in the Senate would be far more precedential and significant than a non-impeachment decision in the House. And I disagree. It would show the blind partisanship of those senators, many of whom are up for re-election in 2020. There are 34 seats, and I think 30 of them are Republicans in 2020. And here's a guy I loathe, Cass Sunstein, the Harvard Law School professor. I loathe him because he has attacked people who question government narratives as conspiracy theorists and speculated on ways to shut us down. But Sunstein says, if we have a clear impeachable offense that is not borderline, but a clear one, the impeachment process is mandatory because the House of Representatives is an agent of we the people, the first three words of the Constitution. All right. There is an interesting little issue surfacing from Madrid. On the 22nd of February, the embassy of North Korea was broken into and staffers were held hostage while 10 attackers ransacked the place and made off with computers. We're told that 2 of the men have been linked to the Central Intelligence Agency. A police officer went to the embassy and was told everything was fine by a man who answered the door, but moments later the gates swung open and 2 high-end cars came out at a great speed, leaving the area within seconds. The attackers were described as mostly Korean. At least 2 of them have been identified by Spanish intelligence services as having links to the CIA. Reminds me of the botched raid in Milan, Italy, back in 2004. Our media covers up the bungles of the CIA. That report came from a British newspaper. I haven't seen diddly about it in the U.S. media. 2 senators, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, 1 Ed Markey, 1 Mike Lee from Utah, are renewing their demand to the Department of Homeland Security to stop the rollout of the facial recognition systems at airports until we get some rules in place. Quote from their letter, DHS has failed to follow through, appears to be expanding the program. DHS has a statutory requirement to submit a report to Congress detailing the viability of biometric technologies, including privacy implications and accuracy. DHS should pause their efforts until American travelers fully understand exactly who has access to their facial recognition data, how long it'll be held, how it'll be safeguarded, and how they can opt out of the program if they want to. I don't expect a response anytime soon. The ACLU is exposing that Big Brother is collecting license plate records from all over the country and using them to identify the locations of immigrants tagged for deportation. Emails reveal that police have informally given driver information to immigration officers requesting those details. That appears to violate local laws and the sanctuary laws that are active here in California. Now, ICE has a $6 million contract with Thomson Reuters to access a license plate reader database maintained by Vigilant Solutions. And we now have these license plate readers all over the place. And in some cases, I can say that they are reasonable. If you want to scan license plates that are coming onto private property or coming into an identified zone where it says your license plate will be read, that might be legitimate. But we have massive collection of license plates at bridge tolls, at other tolling positions. And there are private entities who set them up that also feed this database. And with the combination of that data and GPS, it's a frightening violation of our Fourth Amendment rights to privacy. A good piece over at Mint Press News today under the byline of the British journalist Nafiz Ahmed. And he picks up on the story from the 4th of March in the New York Times that the NSA's collection of telephone metadata, that program has been quietly stopped. And I was one of the people who, in a somewhat skeptical way, said, well, if this is true, that's a good thing. But Ahmed went and talked to two whistleblowers from the NSA who I deeply respect, Russell Tice and Tom Drake. Both told him that the NSA's shutdown of this particular program doesn't imply an end to domestic phone record surveillance, but quite the opposite, that they've found another way to do it with superior technology. Tice: why would anyone believe a bloody word of what NSA says about their mass domestic surveillance programs? They've lied repeatedly in the past, they're lying now, or they're likely lying now, he said. They have been collecting metadata and content word for word, both voice and text, for some time now. Of course, NSA is still conducting phone and computer comm surveillance, and yes, wider programs go on, and a new massive program that is more efficient is likely to have already been implemented. And Tom Drake echoes, surveillance can continue under another special, exigent, exceptional authorities and programs, including Section 702 and Executive Order 12333. So, Big Brother, still watching and listening very closely. Our friend John Zwiebel in Hawaii is a big supporter of Tulsi Gabbard. And like him, I am attracted to some of her positions on foreign policy, including an end to involvement in regime change wars. And this seems to really disturb the gatekeepers in corporate media. And Kevin Gosztola at Shadowproof details how, when Gabbard was interviewed on CNN, they went after her with Josh Rogan. He's a Washington Post and CNN political analyst, and he basically accused her of being un-American because she had a meeting with Bashar Assad when she went to Syria. And here's a quote from Rogan. Gabbard comes from a place that in our politics that's found both on the left and the right, believing that sovereign nations should have power over their own territory, over their citizens, that we shouldn't be involved in these places. I think that's not so far from what Trump believes and what Sanders believes. A lot of Americans believe that. That's a legitimate foreign policy view. It doesn't happen to be the one I agree with, but that's all fine. So there's one position that says, I'm still quoting Rogan, America should get involved and save all these people from their dictators. And then there's one that says we shouldn't do anything. Somewhere in the middle is where the actual policy should be. But Gabbard is denying the atrocities, or at least denying evidence of the atrocities. Well, that's not what she has been doing. This is a very unfair smear, because as an Iraq War veteran, she has a very well-articulated position about how we get into these regime change wars and why we shouldn't. And Caitlin Johnstone brought to my attention that when Tulsi Gabbard was a guest on Stephen Colbert's late-night comedy show, that he didn't crack any jokes. He immediately went to a list of talking points from the pro-military corporate media. Colbert: do you think the Iraq War was worth it? Gabbard: no. Do you think our involvement in Syria has been worth it? No. Do you think that ISIS could have been defeated without our involvement, without our support of the local troops there? Gabbard: There are two things we need to address in Syria. One is a regime change war that was first launched by the U.S. in 2011, covertly led by the CIA. That's a regime change war that's continued over the years, has increased the suffering of the Syrian people, strengthened groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, because the CIA was using American taxpayer dollars to provide arms and training and equipment to those terrorist groups to get them to overthrow the government. So that is a regime change war that we should not have been engaging in. Colbert. But if it's someone like Assad who gasses his own people or engages in war crimes against his own people, should the United States not be involved? Gabbard. The United States shouldn't be intervening to overthrow these dictators and regimes we don't like Assad, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, Kim Jong-un. There are bad people in the world, but history has shown us that every time the U.S. goes in and topples these dictators that we don't like, trying to end up like the world's police, we end up increasing the suffering of the people in these countries. Well, Tulsi Gabbard really gets it. And Stephen Colbert should stick to the Trump jokes. He's pretty good at that. And finally today, I'm going to talk about this FBI investigation that was made public yesterday about the scams of college admission schemes. And I have to explain that the brother of a man I know is one of the suspects in this case. And this is the family, which includes the actress Lori Loughlin and her husband, the fashion designer Massimo Giannulli. And their two daughters are students at USC, the University of Southern California, after the parents paid $500,000 in bribes to get them in the side door. They claimed that the daughters would be on the rowing team at USC, but they had never taken part in the sport before. And this is a pattern that we've seen related to this guy Singer, who was collecting money from parents and then passing it along as bribes to get the parents' children into the universities of their choice. Now, this is a very ugly exposure. It shows the sense of entitlement, the power of wealthy individuals who will skirt the law, break the law, and they did it for their kids. I think this is totally misguided. To insert your child into a university they're not qualified to attend is just bad all the way around. And what's amazing is I looked at the Daily Digest online of California newspaper stories. Every city has suspects in this case. And they're often very well-known and wealthy, staunch members of the community. Now, my takeaway from this is that these people should be prosecuted. These crimes should be exposed. But I doubt if it's going to change the fact that university admissions have always been skewed. And whether daddy bought a building and put the family name on it, or greased the university endowments for years to come, there will always be ways that people muscle their children into a university that they're not qualified to attend. This is an indictment of our culture, and I don't expect it to change. Thanks for joining me for my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide, and you'll find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.